Picture this. You're at a late summer picnic, right? The sun is shining, all the food is laid out, and you are just about to take a sip of a sugary ice-cold drink when you hear it.
Oh, yeah, that high-pitched buzzing.
Exactly, that aggressive buzzing. A yellow and black, completely uninvited guest is just hovering right over your cup, like totally fearless, acting like it owns the place.
Right, and for most of you listening, I mean, that insect isn't exactly a marvel of nature.
No, not at all. It's an aggressive, buzzing backyard pest that, seems to exist solely to ruin your afternoon.
It is a very, very universal human experience. In fact, studies looking at public perception show that the first words popping into people's minds when they hear the word wasp are usually sting, annoying, and dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, the bias is immediate.
Completely deeply ingrained.
But in this deep dive, our mission is to completely reframe your understanding of the wasp. We are going to tear down that whole angry pest stereotype and look at what the source material actually reveals, which is honestly a masterclass in evolution.
Absolutely. We're talking about mind-boggling diversity here.
Right, like some gruesome, almost sci-fi level biology, and a completely unsung role as nature's most vital pest controllers. Honestly, judging the entire wasp family by those few yellow jackets that crash our picnics.
It's like judging all of humanity based solely on internet trolls.
Yes, exactly. You're only seeing the absolute loudest, most annoying fraction of this massive, incredibly complex population.
Yeah, and to really grasp how limited our perception of wasps is, we first have to figure out what a wasp actually is.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, the answer to that requires a fairly radical shift in how we categorize insects. The sources bring up this concept of a paraphyletic grouping.
I saw that word in the reading, and I'm going to need you to unpack that for me. Like, what does paraphyletic actually mean for our little picnic crasher?
So in biology, scientists generally prefer to organize animals into what we call clades.
Okay, clades.
Right. Think of a clade as a complete self-contained branch on the tree of life. It includes one single common ancestor and absolutely all of its descendants. Neat and tidy.
Makes sense.
But wasps, they completely defy that neat categorization. They belong to a massive suborder of insects, but within that ancient evolutionary tree of wasps, certain branches eventually evolved to become ants.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and entirely different branches evolved to become bees.
Wait, hold on. I'm trying to visualize this tree. If bees and ants evolved directly from wasp ancestors, and they're just sitting right there on the wasp family tree.
Yep, they are.
Then why don't we just call bees, I don't know, fuzzy vegetarian wasps?
We probably should. It's very similar to the modern scientific realization that birds are technically dinosaurs.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great comparison.
Right. Just as birds are a highly specialized surviving branch of theropod dinosaurs, bees and ants are deeply nested right within the wasp lineage.
So it's like taking a giant family reunion photo, but you're just cropping out a couple of siblings purely because they decided to adopt a vegetarian lifestyle and, change their last name to bee.
That is a perfect way to put it. They are still fundamentally part of the family, even if we put them in a different frame.
That's wild.
And we only gave them different names because humans named these insects centuries before we had any real understanding of their DNA.
So it's a historical naming glitch.
Basically, yeah. So today, technically speaking, a wasp is defined by a negative. A wasp is any narrow-waisted insect in this evolutionary group that is not a bee and not an ant.
Okay, well, that immediately changes the scale of what we are dealing with here. We aren't just talking about a couple of species that build paper nests under our eaves.
Not at all.
So how big is this hidden family?
Oh, we are looking at an incredibly successful, globally distributed lineage. And it first appeared way back in the Jurassic period.
So they were hanging out with the dinosaurs.
Exactly. And today, scientists have described well over 100,000 species of wasps.
100,000.
And estimates suggest there are hundreds of thousands more still waiting to be discovered. I mean, they have conquered almost every single ecosystem on Earth.
The physical extremes are what really stood out to me in the sources. I mean, how small do these things actually get?
Oh, on the microscopic end, you have a solitary fairy fly. It's known as kikikihuna.
Kikikihuna, okay.
And it is the smallest known flying insect in the entire world. Its total body length is 0.15 millimeters.
Wait, 0.15 millimeters. You could fit a whole swarm of them on the head of a pin.
You easily could. It is barely visible to the naked eye. But then you pan the camera all the way to the other end of the biological spectrum and you run into absolute titans.
Like the Asian giant hornet.
Yes, which grows up to 2 inches in length. Or look at the tarantula hawk.
I read about the tarantula hawk, and honestly, the name alone is intimidating enough.
Yeah, it definitely earns that name. It needs that massive size because of its lifestyle. It physically hunts tarantulas.
Which is just terrifying.
It is. This wasp has to overpower a spider many times its own weight, paralyze it with a sting that ranks near the very top of the human pain index.
Oh, I've heard about that sting.
Yep.
It's supposed to be agonizing.
Beyond agonizing. And then it physically drags that heavy, paralyzed spider all the way across the desert floor back to a burrow.
Dragging a paralyzed tarantula across the desert? I mean, it brings up a massive misconception we have. Because we only really notice the wasps that build those giant, terrifying paper nests in our trees or up in our attics.
Right, the yellow jackets and hornets.
Exactly. So we just naturally assume that's what all wasps do. We think of them as these swarming militaristic societies ready to attack us.
But the reality is that social wasps make up a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. The vast majority of wasp species are actually solitary.
So they're just out there flying solo.
Completely independent lives. No queens, no swarming workers defending a colony, no massive paper fortresses.
Just single moms trying to make it work.
Pretty much. You just have individual females going about their business, digging little burrows in the ground or, building tiny mud pots, all just to provision their own individual offspring.
And this brings us to a really dramatic generational shift in their diet, right? Because the adult solitary wasps flying around, they're actually pretty peaceful.
They are. They spend their days drinking nectar from flowers. Very chill.
But their babies, the larvae, they need high-protein diets to grow. They need meat.
Oh, yeah. They need fresh meat.
And how the mothers provide that fresh meat brings us to what I can only describe as a straight-up biological horror story.
It really is. It's a phenomenal, if brutal, evolutionary strategy called parasitoidism.
Okay, break that down. How is that different from a regular parasite?
Well, true parasites usually want to keep their hosts alive as long as possible. A tick, for example, doesn't want you to die. It just wants a meal.
Right, you're the cafeteria.
Exactly. But parasitoid wasps have a life cycle that inherently requires the death of the host. They lay their eggs on or directly inside another living insect.
It's the exact plot of the movie Alien.
It literally is.
Like the creature implants an egg in a living host, the host walks around totally unaware, and eventually the baby bursts out. And to think that this intense, chest-bursting drama is happening thousands of times a day right under your nose in your own backyard. It's wild.
And the mechanical extremes they go to are staggering. Take a specific wasp from the Ichneumonidae family, Megarhissa macrurus.
Oh, the one with the drill. I saw the pictures in the source material.
Yes. The female's body is roughly 2 inches long, but she has this specialized egg-laying organ, an ovipositor trailing behind her that is 4 inches long.
4 inches? That's twice the size of her body.
Exactly. It looks like a terrifyingly long stinger, but she doesn't use it for defense. It is a highly sensitive, incredibly strong biological drill.
And the sources say she uses this drill on solid wood, which is just hard to wrap my head around. Like, how does a delicate insect bore through a literal tree trunk?
It's amazing. She hunts the larvae of another insect called a horntail sawfly, and those larvae live completely buried inside the solid wood of dying trees.
So they're hidden away, completely out of sight.
Totally hidden. So the wasp walks along the bark, tapping it with her antenna. She can actually smell the fungus associated with her prey, and she can feel the microscopic vibrations of the larva chewing deep inside the wood.
That's like a superpower. She has sonar.
Pretty much. And once she pinpoints the exact location, she unsheathes that 4-inch ovipositor. It has hardened tips, fortified with zinc.
Fortified with zinc, like a literal metal drill bit.
Exactly like a drill bit.
Yeah.
She uses it to physically saw down through inches of solid wood, puncture the hidden larva, and inject an egg inside it.
And then the host just stays alive in the dark, trapped inside the tree, while the baby wasp slowly eats it from the inside out.
Yep. It's incredibly grim.
It's so grim. And the sources mentioned this specific biology actually caused a major philosophical crisis in the 19th century.
Oh, absolutely. And Charles Darwin himself wrestled with this.
Wait, really? Darwin?
Yeah. In an 1860 letter, he explicitly referenced these parasitoid wasps while grappling with the brutality of the natural world. He wrote that he simply could not persuade himself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have intentionally designed these wasps with the express purpose of feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars.
Wow. So the parasitoid lifestyle is so clinically ruthless, it literally made Darwin question the existence of a benevolent creator.
It did. It shook him.
You can completely see why. It is perfectly engineered cruelty. But from a purely evolutionary standpoint, being a solitary, chest-bursting assassin is a brilliantly successful strategy.
It works perfectly.
Which makes me wonder, if the solitary assassin model works so incredibly well, why change the formula? Why did a specific branch of Wasp bother evolving into the complex, swarming social colonies that we are so afraid of today?
That's the big question. And to understand that leap into society, we have to look at their architecture and, more importantly, their genetics.
Let's start with the architecture.
Okay, so social wasps build intricate honeycombed nests. But unlike honeybees, which have glands that secrete wax to build their hives, social wasps actually invented paper.
Invented paper. Long before humans were pulping wood to make books, wasps were mastering the exact same industrial process.
Millions of years before us, they fly out, find weathered wood on old trees or wooden fences, and physically scrape off the fibers with their jaws.
I've actually seen them doing that on my back deck.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. They chew those fibers up, mixing them with protein-rich saliva, which acts as a glue.
Nice.
Then they regurgitate this pulp to construct those durable, weather-resistant, multi-layered paper fortresses you see hanging from tree branches.
Okay, so the architecture is amazing. But what drives thousands of individual insects to give up their own ability to reproduce just to build a paper castle and serve a single queen?
Right, why be a worker when you could be a mom?
Exactly. The sources point to a genetic system called haplodiploidy. And I have to admit, the math here completely broke my brain. So
Yeah.
walk me through how this works.
Okay, it is a radically different way of determining sex compared to humans. In mammals, sex is determined by X and Y chromosomes. You get half your genetic material from your mother and half from your father.
Standard high school biology.
Right, but in wasps and other hymenoptera like ants and bees, females are diploid, meaning they have two sets of chromosomes and develop from fertilized eggs.
Okay, diploid. Got it.
But males are haploid, they only have one set of chromosomes, and they develop from unfertilized eggs.
Hold on, I'm losing the thread here.
Yeah.
A male develops from an unfertilized egg. So a male wasp literally doesn't have a father.
That is correct. A male wasp has a grandfather, but no father.
That's wild.
And because of this, the female wasp, the queen, she has an evolutionary superpower.
What's that?
After mating, she stores the sperm inside her body. As she lays each individual egg, she makes a voluntary choice.
Wait, she chooses.
She chooses. She can open a tiny valve and release sperm to fertilize the egg, creating a female, or she can keep the valve closed, laying an unfertilized egg, which becomes a male.
That is insane. She can just decide, like, oh, I think I need more daughters for the workforce today, and selectively fertilize her eggs.
Exactly.
But how does this voluntary sex determination completely rewrite the rules of building a society? Like, why do the sisters cooperate so fiercely?
Okay, so it comes down to evolutionary math, specifically a concept called kin selection. Let's use an analogy to make it easier. Imagine an animal's genetic blueprint is a deck of 52 playing cards.
Okay, I'm picturing the deck of cards.
In a mammalian system, a mother shuffles her deck and gives you 26 random cards. The father shuffles his deck and gives you 26 random cards.
Right.
If you have a sister, she also gets a random half from mom and a random half from dad. Statistically, you and your sister will share about 50% of your cards.
Makes sense. Typical sibling genetics. We're 50% related.
Now, apply this to wasps. The mother still shuffles her 52-card deck and gives 26 random cards to her daughter. But the father wasp is haploid.
Right, the unfertilized egg guy.
Exactly. He doesn't have a 52-card deck. He only has 26 cards total.
Oh, so he can't shuffle.
He can't shuffle. He simply hands his entire 26-card deck to every single daughter he ever produces.
Oh, wow. So every single sister in that wasp nest is holding the exact same 26 cards from their dad.
Yes, they share 100% of their father's genes.
That completely changes the math.
It does. Because when you add the random 26 cards they get from their mother, wasp sisters share 75% of their genetic makeup. They are exceptionally closely related, much, much closer than normal mammalian siblings.
I see where this is going. If a worker wasp were to leave the nest and have her own daughter, she would only share 50% of her genes with that daughter.
Exactly.
But she shares 75% of her genes with her sisters back at the nest.
You've hit the nail on the head. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, the biological drive to ensure your genetic code survives into the next generation It is actually a better mathematical investment for a female wasp to stay home and help her mother raise more sisters.
Than it is to strike out on her own.
Right. This genetic quirk heavily favored the evolution of cooperation, creating these massive, ultra-devoted empires.
They essentially hacked the genetic code to build an army of hyper-loyal sisters.
That's exactly what they did.
Okay, so we've covered the massive scale of their family tree, the chest-bursting horror movies playing out in the woodpile, and the bizarre genetic math that builds paper castles. It's a fascinating picture, but honestly, it's still a bit intimidating.
Shares a lot.
Let's look at why we actually need them. Because they aren't just terrifying marvels of evolution, right? They are critical cornerstones of human agriculture.
They absolutely are. Let's loop back to those solitary parasitoid wasps. We talked about how brutal their life cycle is, but that brutality is highly, highly targeted.
Okay, targeted how?
Well, solitary wasps parasitize almost every pest insect on the planet. Caterpillars, aphids, whiteflies. If it eats our crops, there is likely a highly specialized wasp that hunts it. They are the ultimate biological pest controllers.
So it is the difference between a broad chemical carpet bomb and a highly targeted drone strike.
I love that analogy.
Because when we spray chemical pesticides across a field, it's totally destructive. It wipes out the good bugs with the bad, and it leaches into the soil and the water.
It's messy.
But a parasitoid wasp acts like a heat-seeking missile. It is programmed to hunt down exactly one specific type of agricultural pest and eliminate it, leaving the rest of the ecosystem completely untouched.
And humans have recognized this utility for a long time. There is a microscopic parasitoid wasp called Encarsia formosa.
Oh, the greenhouse one.
Yeah, its specialty is hunting whiteflies, which are absolutely devastating to horticultural crops. We actually started using these tiny wasps commercially in European greenhouses all the way back in the 1920s.
The 1920s. That's decades before synthetic chemical pesticides became the default in farming.
Yep. And today, as the agricultural industry really confronts the environmental damage of chemical reliance, biological control is seeing a massive resurgence.
That's great to hear.
Millions of these tiny wasps are systematically released in commercial greenhouses across the globe to protect crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, and strawberries.
So they're just on patrol.
Right. The female wasp finds a whitefly scale, evaluates it with her antenna, and inserts an egg. The whitefly scale turns completely black as the wasp larva consumes it.
Wow.
Without this invisible, basically unpaid insect workforce, maintaining our greenhouse food supply would require massive, massive chemical intervention.
So they are out there acting as tiny bodyguards for our tomatoes.
They really are.
But pest control is only half the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
They also have a massive hidden role in pollination.
They do, which surprises a lot of people.
Yeah, because the sources point out that most wasps don't have the fuzzy hairs or the specialized pollen baskets that bees use to gather pollen, so we don't usually think of them as pollinators at all.
Right, they're not built for it in the same way.
But there is one specific relationship that is so specialized, it just defies belief. The fig wasps.
Oh, the fig-wasp mutualism is easily one of the most remarkable evolutionary partnerships on Earth.
I couldn't agree more.
So there are nearly 1,000 different species of tropical fig trees, and almost every single one of those fig species has its own unique, highly specific species of wasp that co-evolved alongside it.
1,000 different trees paired up with 1,000 different wasps, just perfectly matched like a lock and key.
Exactly.
How does that pollination process actually work? Because a fig doesn't exactly look like a normal flower.
That's because a fig is an inverted flower.
An inverted flower?
Yeah, it is a hollow, fleshy structure with hundreds of tiny, delicate flowers blooming on the inside.
Okay, so the flowers are trapped.
Trapped inside. So wind can't pollinate them and normal bees can't reach them. The only way in is a microscopic pore at the base of the fig called the ostiole. And the female fig wasp has a specialized head shape that allows her to literally force her way through this incredibly tight passage.
The sources mentioned she actually loses her wings and antenna while squeezing through that tiny opening.
She does. It's violent. It is a one-way trip. Once she is inside the dark cavity of the fig, she wanders around in the dark, pollinating the tiny flowers with pollen she brought from her birth fig.
Wow.
And then she lays her eggs in some of the flowers, and then she dies inside the fig.
Wait, I have to ask the obvious question here. Does that mean every time I eat a fig, I'm eating a dead, wingless wasp? Like, what about that little crunch?
Oh, no, don't worry. The crunch you feel is just the seeds of the fig.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. The fig tree produces an enzyme called ficin, which completely dissolves the mother wasp's body, absorbing her nutrients back into the fruit.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly closed-loop system.
Nature is incredibly efficient.
It is. Meanwhile, her eggs hatch inside the safety of the fig. The wingless male wasps emerge first. They are essentially blind and exist only to mate with their sisters. And then they use their powerful jaws to chew an exit tunnel through the thick wall of the fig. The males die inside, having never even seen the outside world.
They just do the heavy lifting and die.
Pretty much. And then the newly mated winged females gather pollen, crawl out through the tunnel their brothers dug, and fly off to find a new fig tree to start the whole cycle again.
So the fig tree literally cannot reproduce without the wasp risking its life to get inside.
Right.
And the wasp has nowhere else on Earth to safely raise its young. They're completely dependent on each other.
It is an absolute biological necessity.
Which means if you enjoy eating figs, you literally owe that experience to a wasp.
You absolutely do.
Let's bring this all together for you listening. We started this deep dive looking at that yellow jacket buzzing around your soda at a summer picnic.
And yes, in that moment, it's definitely annoying.
But hopefully the next time that happens, you won't just see a pest. You'll see a representative of a sprawling ancient lineage that has been adapting and surviving since the days of the dinosaurs.
A family tree so massive and diverse, it encompasses everything from microscopic fairies floating on the breeze to giant tarantula-hunting gladiators.
You're looking at a lineage of insects that invented industrial paper manufacturing millions of years before human civilization.
That hack their own genetic math to build complex, cooperative societies.
And that serves as the invisible glue holding massive portions of our agricultural ecosystem together.
It really is awe-inspiring.
But the sources leave us with a really troubling thought. Because public perception of wasps is overwhelmingly negative because we just default to thinking of them as annoying or dangerous. There is a severe lack of conservation research for wasps compared to bees.
It's a real problem. We're throwing massive amounts of funding and public goodwill at saving the bees, which, don't get me wrong, is fantastic.
Well, totally. Save the bees.
But we are completely ignoring the wasps in the process. It is a critical blind spot in our ecological planning. The negative bias is stalling efforts to track and develop conservation strategies for threatened wasp species. We simply don't know the full extent of what we are losing until it's already gone.
Which leaves you with this final provocative thought to ponder. If wasps are quietly out there running the world's most effective, invisible pest control service, keeping the aphids and whiteflies off the crops that literally feed us,
right?
What happens to global agriculture if we accidentally wipe them out, just because they don't have the cuddly, fuzzy PR campaign of the honeybee?
It's a scary thought.
It really is. So next time that uninvited yellow and black guest lands on your picnic table, you might want to think twice before swatting it away. It just might be the reason you have food on your plate to begin with. Right now, the next time you're at a coffee shop or just, walking through the grocery store, I want you to look around.
You're definitely going to see someone with a tattoo. I mean, they're everywhere.
Exactly. And, if you have one yourself, there's this microscopic war happening right beneath your skin, literally right now.
Yeah, it's wild to think about. Millions of your own white blood cells are just actively swallowing toxic ink.
Right, and then they just freeze in place. And they die, only to be replaced by a fresh wave of cells that come in and swallow that exact same ink all over again.
It's not just a painting sitting quietly on a canvas,
No, it's not. It is an endless, decades-long immune system stalemate.
And that biological glitch, the body's inability to clear these pigment particles, that's actually the entire foundation of a practice that predates the written word.
Which is just staggering.
Right, because we tend to view body art through this highly modern, aesthetic lens today. But the human drive to permanently alter the dermis, it's deeply, deeply embedded in our evolutionary and cultural history.
And that perfectly sets our mission for this deep dive. Because today, we are unpacking the history, the really surprising underlying biology, and the profound psychology of tattooing.
Yeah, we're going to look at how painful ancient ritual basically evolved into a marker of elite luxury and then, violently swung into a symbol of the criminal underground.
We'll explore the cellular mechanics that make ink permanent, that whole war we just mentioned, and look at how human beings have utilized that permanence, both for absolute authoritarian control and, on the flip side, profound psychological healing.
And just to give you an overview of the sources we're working from today, they provide a really comprehensive look across multiple disciplines.
Right, it's a huge mix.
It is. We're drawing from archaeological records of mummified ancient remains, the sociological history of 18th century maritime exploration, and modern medical literature, including some fascinating advanced imaging studies from the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility.
So I want to start with the origins, and specifically the language, because even the word tattoo itself feels like it has a story behind it. Where did that term actually originate?
Well, before the 18th century, people in the West didn't even use that word.
Really? What did they say?
If a European encountered someone with body art, they described the practice using terms like painting or scarring or staining. The word tattoo actually derives from the Samoan word tatau.
Tatau.
Yeah, which translates literally to strike.
To strike. I mean, that implies a very different physical mechanism than like a modern needle buzzing away.
It was an entirely different mechanism. Traditional Polynesian tattooing did not use a buzzing machine. It utilized a highly specialized hand tool.
What was it made of?
Often crafted from the wing bone of a flying fox, or sometimes boar tusks. And they'd fashion it into this comb-like structure.
Okay.
So the artist would dip this comb into pigment, place it right against the skin, and then use a secondary wooden mallet to rhythmically strike the tool.
So they're literally tapping it in.
Exactly. The force of the strike is what drove the pigment through the epidermis and down into the deeper dermal layer.
Which sounds incredibly painful. But I should clarify something for anyone who might be wondering, because I certainly was when I was reviewing the sources.
Oh, about the military term.
Yeah. Because there's a military drumbeat that's also called a tattoo, and this skin ink term has absolutely nothing to do with that.
Right, totally separate.
That military term actually comes from a totally different Dutch phrase, tapto, which was basically a signal to turn off the beer taps in the taverns.
Just a pure linguistic coincidence that they sound identical in English.
Exactly. But returning to the practice itself you mentioned, it predates the written word. Just how far back in the archaeological record are we going?
We can confidently trace it back over 5,000 years.
5 millennia.
Yeah. The most famous example is Ötzi the Iceman. His naturally mummified remains were preserved in glacial ice up in the Alps.
Right, he's basically the most famous mummy next to King Tut.
Pretty much. He lived around 3330 BCE, and when researchers did radiological examinations, they mapped a total of 61 tattoos on his body.
61 tattoos on a man living over 5 millennia ago.
Whoa.
But what really struck me in the research wasn't just the sheer number of them, but the designs.
Yeah, they weren't what you'd expect.
Right. He wasn't sporting like a tribal sleeve or, cool animal figures. They were mostly just these simple utilitarian lines and crosses.
And the placement of those lines is the key insight here. Scientists performed these advanced radiological scans on his skeleton, and they mapped the exact locations of the marks on his skin.
And what did they find?
They correspond almost perfectly to areas of his body that were suffering from age-conditioned degeneration, just, significant joint wear and tear.
Wait, really?
Yeah. We are talking about osteochondrosis in his lumbar spine and severe cartilage deterioration in his knee and his ankle joints.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Yeah.
If the tattoos map directly over his deteriorating joints, we aren't looking at body art.
No, we aren't.
We're looking at like a permanent ancient form of ibuprofen. It's essentially a medical brace or some targeted pain relief system.
That is exactly what the current anthropological consensus suggests. The incisions were likely made and then rubbed with charcoal soot, and that created a prolonged immune response that might have actually provided localized pain relief.
So it's medical.
Highly medical. Yeah. The mechanics basically mirror an early form of acupuncture, and what makes this just geographically staggering is that Ötzi lived roughly 2,000 years before acupuncture was even documented in China.
Wow. It just completely dismantles the idea that ancient tattooing was purely for like aesthetic or social edge. For Ötzi, it was functional biological medicine.
Though we shouldn't assume medicine was the only ancient application.
Fair point.
Right, because if we look at Egypt around the exact same era specifically, there's a naturally mummified man from Gebelen dated between 3351 and 3D17 BCE. We find the earliest known figural tattoos.
So actual pictures, not just lines.
Exactly. This individual had 2 overlapping depictions on his arm, and they've been identified as a wild bull and a Barbary sheep.
So simultaneously, you have this functional pain relief medicine in the Alps and symbolic storytelling or maybe magic in Egypt.
Right. Humans have been utilizing the permanence of ink literally since the dawn of civilization.
But how did this ancient, highly functional practice transition into the modern Western world? Because for a long time, looking at the history, the West just seemed to have totally forgotten about it.
Yeah, the Western rediscovery, so to speak, of the tattoo is heavily tied to maritime exploration in the 18th century.
Right, the sailors.
Yeah, specifically we have to look at the voyages of Captain James Cook to the South Pacific in the 1760s and 70s. Cook's crew included Sir Joseph Banks, who was this highly educated aristocrat and botanist.
Okay.
And when they arrived in Tahiti and other Polynesian islands, they observed the intricate tattoo practices firsthand.
And they didn't just observe it, right? They brought it home.
They did.
They brought the phonetic word tattoo into the English lexicon. And on his first voyage, Cook actually brought a tattooed Rhyadian man named Omai back to England.
Which was a massive cultural event.
Yeah, Omai was presented directly to King George in the English court.
And Omai's presentation sparked this huge sociological phenomenon. By the 1870s, right in the middle of the Victorian era,
Which is a period we typically associate with, like extreme modesty.
complete conservatism. But despite that, tattoos became a massive fad among British royalty and the upper classes.
That feels so counterintuitive to me. I mean, you picture Victorian elites buttoned up to their chins, right?
Yeah.
Not sitting down for tattoo sessions. Why would the highest echelons of society adopt a Polynesian striking ritual?
Well, it was a form of extreme, private, conspicuous consumption.
Meaning it was a flex.
A huge flex. Getting a tattoo in the 1870s required enormous resources. You either had to possess the wealth to travel by ship to exotic locations yourself, or you had to be rich enough to hire a specialized artisan who had made that journey and brought the skills back.
So it wasn't cheap.
Not at all. It was a bespoke, painful luxury. Figures like Prince Albert and Tsar Nicholas II, they acquired these elaborate custom pieces.
Oh, wow, the Tsar of Russia.
Yeah, and the modesty of the era actually enhanced the appeal, oddly enough.
Because it was hidden.
Exactly. The tattoo was this secret symbol of worldly elite status hidden under tailored clothing, and you only shared it with a select few.
But that elite status obviously didn't last. Because when I think of tattoos, I don't think of Victorian royalty. And the catalyst for its downfall, according to the sources, was a piece of technology.
Right. The electric tattoo machine.
How'd that come about?
So in 1891, a New York tattooer named Samuel O'Reilly patented the first electric tattoo machine. But he didn't invent the mechanism from scratch.
They borrowed it.
He adapted an earlier invention by Thomas Edison. It was called the electric perforating pen, which Edison originally designed for document copying.
Wait, how did adapting a document copier change the actual process of tattooing?
So O'Reilly modified Edison's rotary mechanism, and he added a tube and needle assembly. Instead of an artist manually tapping a bone comb, or hand-poking a needle a few times a second.
That takes forever.
Takes hours and hours. The electric machine could drive ink into the skin at roughly 50 punctures a second.
50 a second. So you take a process that used to require hours of painstaking, incredibly expensive manual labor, and you make it incredibly fast, highly efficient, and vastly cheaper.
It completely democratized the art form.
But I have to pause here, because in almost every other creative industry, when a new technology democratizes an art form and makes it accessible to the masses, it becomes more culturally entrenched, right?
Usually, yeah.
Like the printing press or the camera, they brought art to the mainstream and elevated it. But with tattoos, making it affordable actually destroyed its cultural prestige.
It is a textbook sociological paradox. The upper-class fascination with tattoos was entirely dependent on gatekeeping. The value wasn't in the art itself. The value was in the exclusivity. The moment O'Reilly's machine allowed, say, an average worker to afford a tattoo for a few cents, the elite abandoned the practice entirely. The status signal just evaporated overnight.
If anyone can get one, the aristocrats don't want one.
Exactly. So from there, the cultural association shifted really aggressively. Because it was now cheap and very accessible in port cities, it was rapidly adopted by sailors, laborers, and eventually the criminal underworld.
Which makes sense.
Right, because the permanence of the mark made it an ideal tool for organizations that required absolute lifelong loyalty.
And we see that play out globally in the sources, like the Yakuza in Japan, utilizing traditional Irezumi to signal gang affiliation, or the highly codified visual language of the Russian mafia.
Oh, the Russian mafia tattoos are incredibly specific.
Yeah, where like a specific bell tattoo or star on the knee broadcasts an individual's entire criminal history and their rank in the prison system.
And that transition, from a royal secret to a criminal ledger, it relies entirely on the concept of permanence.
Right.
Whether you are an 18th century duke or a 20th century convict, the power of the tattoo is that it cannot be easily undone. Which brings us back to the biological mechanics we teased earlier.
Why doesn't the human body simply heal a tattoo the way it heals a scrape or a minor burn?
That's the million-dollar question.
And this is the cellular mechanism I mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive, that microscopic war. Because getting a tattoo is, medically speaking, technically a trauma.
A significant one, yeah.
The machine's needle is bypassing the outer layer of skin, the epidermis, and it's injecting foreign chemicals deep into the dermis.
And your immune system's response to that injection is immediate, and it is aggressive.
It's an invasion.
Right. It registers the puncture wounds and the influx of these foreign ink particles as a dangerous infection. So the body deploys these specialized white blood cells called macrophages.
Macrophages.
Yes. Their biological imperative is to rush to the site of an infection, engulf the foreign invaders, and then carry them away through the lymphatic system to be destroyed.
Okay, let me offer an analogy to help visualize this because the sources described it so well. Imagine a microscopic game of Pac-Man.
I love this analogy.
The immune system releases all these little Pac-Man ghosts, the macrophages, and they rush over to eat the dots, which are the tiny particles of tattoo ink. They successfully swallow the ink. But here is the critical failure, right? The ink particles are too large, and they are too chemically stable for the macrophage's enzymes to break down.
The macrophages essentially choke on the pigment. Because they cannot dissolve the ink and because they are now heavily weighed down by it, they physically cannot return to the lymphatic system.
They get stuck.
They become physically trapped in the dermal matrix. They just sit there, holding the pigment suspended inside their own cellular bodies.
The ghosts eat the dots, but then they just freeze in place. The game simply stops.
But a single cell doesn't live forever, right?
Exactly. What happens when that specific macrophage eventually dies, say a decade later?
Well, when the macrophage reaches the end of its life cycle, it ruptures, and it releases the ink particle back into the dermis.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And the immune system, recognizing the invader all over again, immediately dispatches a fresh macrophage to the site.
So a new one comes in.
The new cell swallows the exact same piece of ink and subsequently freezes in place. Again.
That's incredible.
Your tattoo remains visible not because the ink simply stained the tissue like food coloring, but because your body is trapped in a perpetual cycle of attempting and failing to clear the wound.
It is a lifelong standoff. And this cyclical dying and replacing of cells that really explains why tattoos change over time.
Absolutely.
Because every time a cell ruptures and a new one takes over, the ink particles can drift slightly, moving deeper into the skin.
Yeah, that microscopic movement over years.
That's why a tattoo with, crisp, sharp lines at age 20 looks slightly blurred and softened by the time you're age 60.
It also highlights why we must objectively evaluate the materials being injected, because we are not dealing with a neutral biological event.
It's an active chemical presence.
Exactly. While professional tattooing obviously adheres to strict sterilization to prevent bacterial infection, the chemical composition of the inks themselves interacts deeply with our physiology.
Like allergies.
Yeah, allergic reactions, particularly to red pigments, are really common due to the presence of heavy metals like nickel.
And the sources point out that modern ink chemistry has evolved way, way beyond basic plant dyes or, the carbon soot they used on Earthsea.
Oh, absolutely.
Many modern inks rely on complex nanomaterials.
And the implications of those nanomaterials were recently mapped by a major study out of the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility.
The ESRF.
Yes. The researchers utilized a highly advanced technique called X-ray fluorescence to track the exact chemical footprint of tattoo pigments inside the human body.
And what did they find?
They discovered that while the macrophages hold the majority of the larger ink particles in the dermis, the smallest chemical fragments, particularly nanomaterials like titanium dioxide,
which is used to create white pigment, right, Or to lighten other colors.
Correct. Those tiny nanoparticles, they do not stay put in the dermis.
Where do they go?
They actually migrate away from the skin and they accumulate in the body's lymph nodes.
Wow.
Yeah, the X-ray fluorescence confirmed that the lymph nodes of tattooed individuals physically take on the color of their tattoos. They are stained by this microscopic chemical runoff.
So a tattoo is not a surface-level decoration. It is a systemic alteration.
Truly systemic.
The chemical signature of that ink becomes a permanent resident inside your immune system's filtration network.
And the researchers noted that while there is currently no conclusive evidence linking this lymph node accumulation to chronic inflammation or, severe health crises in the average person, it does prove that the body never stops processing the ink.
It's always dealing with it.
Mm.
And that biological permanence, the fact that the body traps this ink so relentlessly, is exactly what makes tattoos such a potent instrument for human behavior.
It's a heavy tool.
Because if you can mark someone permanently, you can claim them forever.
Mm-hmm.
This mechanism has been weaponized by empires, but it has also been utilized by individuals for, profound healing.
The duality of the permanent mark is striking when you look at the history. Historically, states and empires recognized that stripping away an individual's autonomy often required physically marking them.
Right.
The Roman Empire maintained strict control over enslaved populations, particularly those working in really harsh conditions or gasculum prisons.
How did they mark them?
By tattooing the letters FUG, standing for fugitivus, directly on their foreheads. It was a permanent brand of property and a lifelong deterrent against escape.
And our historical sources detail the incredibly industrial application of this exact concept during the Holocaust.
Yes.
The Nazi regime implemented a system of forcible tattooing at the Auschwitz concentration camp complex. Prisoners were tattooed with specific identification numbers, and in some cases, letters or triangles.
It was horrific.
It was done to systematically strip away their names, catalog them, and entirely dehumanize them.
The administration basically utilized the permanence of the ink strictly for bureaucratic utility and total dehumanization. And in a purely utilitarian parallel, the SS also mandated tattooing for their own personnel.
Oh, their own soldiers.
Yeah, SS soldiers received small tattoos under their left arms denoting their blood types. The permanence was utilized to ensure rapid medical triage on the battlefield, regardless of whether the soldier was conscious or not.
I want to ask you about this because it is staggering to consider the weight of that history.
It really is.
The exact same immune system response, this cellular glitch that traps pigment forever, was utilized by regimes to completely strip people of their humanity, brand them like cattle, and control them.
Yes.
Yet, if we look at modern psychology, that very same biological mechanism is now one of the most effective tools people use to reclaim their bodily autonomy. Isn't that profound?
It's an incredible reversal. The psychological shift over the last few decades is remarkable. The permanence that was once a tool of external control is now sought out for internal empowerment.
Like medical tattoos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Medical tattoos offer a clear example. We are seeing individuals in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease who are actively choosing to get their own names, their blood types, and emergency contact information tattooed on their forearms.
Oh, wow.
They are using the permanence of the ink as an anchor against their own fading cognition. It's an act of self-preservation.
We also see a massive movement within the breast cancer survivor community.
Yes, the post-mastectomy tattoos.
Right. Following a mastectomy, many patients face a really complex relationship with the resulting scars and the trauma of the surgical intervention.
It's a lot to process.
And instead of pursuing traditional reconstructive surgery, a growing number of survivors are choosing to overlay their surgical sites with intricate, highly decorative tattoos.
And the clinical literature surrounding this practice indicates it is highly, highly effective for trauma recovery.
How so?
The patient is taking a site of medical trauma, a mark they absolutely did not choose, and they are overlaying it with art they deliberately selected. The act of sitting for the tattoo, enduring the pain on their own terms, and permanently altering their visual identity. It is a profound reclamation of bodily autonomy.
They are overriding the narrative of the illness.
Exactly, and this psychological utility extends heavily into general mental health as well. We see individuals purposefully using tattoos to cover self-harm scars.
Which is such a powerful visual shift.
The transformation there is twofold. It physically obscures the visual reminder of past distress, but it also replaces it with a symbol of survival. Similarly, memorial tattoos serve as a permanent mechanism for processing grief.
Right. When someone loses a loved one, the permanence of a memorial tattoo offers a way to keep that person physically present.
So you carry them with them.
Literally. As long as the survivor's immune system keeps fighting that microscopic war to hold the ink in place, the story of the person they lost remains visible to the world. It ensures the memory does not fade.
It really bridges the vast timeline we've discussed today. From an ancient hunter seeking localized pain relief in an alpine glacier to a modern individual seeking emotional relief from grief, the fundamental human desire to permanently alter our biology remains totally unchanged.
So let's step back and look at the full picture of what we've unpacked in this deep dive today. A tattoo is never simply a fashion statement or just a reckless decision.
Definitely not.
It is a biological battleground where your cells fight an unwinnable war. It is a historical ledger that tracks the wild fluctuations of human class, shifting from Victorian palaces to maritime ports based entirely on the invention of an electric pen.
Yeah.
And it is a deeply personal, permanent narrative written directly into the dermis.
It's a biological paradox that humanity has learned to leverage for both control and liberation.
So the next time you are standing in line at the grocery store and you see someone with a tattoo, or the next time you look in the mirror at one of your own, I want you to think about the immense, unseen effort keeping that image alive.
The millions of macrophages.
Millions of your cells are working tirelessly right in that exact second to hold that history in place, keeping the story alive.
It adds an entirely new dimension to how we perceive the people around us.
It really does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought regarding that microscopic war we've been talking about.
Ooh, this is the part about laser removal.
Yes, because we know that laser tattoo removal works by utilizing high-powered Q-switch lasers to blast the dermis.
Right. The light energy essentially breaks the molecular bonds of the ink. It fragments those really large pigment particles we talked about into pieces that are finally small enough for the macrophages to swallow and actually carry away.
The immune system is finally given the assistance it needs to win the stalemate and clear the dermis.
Right.
But the body doesn't actually expel the ink.
It doesn't.
As we saw from that synchrotron imaging study, those fragmented chemical particles simply travel through the lymphatic system, and they accumulate in your lymph nodes.
Forever.
Which means, even if you endure all those painful laser treatments to visually erase a tattoo from your skin, the ink never truly leaves you.
It just relocates.
It simply relocates deeper into your internal biology. So imagine a future thousands of years from now, when future archaeologists are excavating our remains, just like anthropologists studied Ötzi the Iceman. What will they deduce from the invisible internal tattoos we leave behind in our bones and tissues? Imagine walking out of a building, looking up at the night sky and seeing this perfectly straight, just beautiful beam of glowing blue light shooting up into infinity.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, right?
Exactly. You might think you're looking at, I don't know, a marvel of modern science, something almost celestial.
Right.
But in reality, you were looking at an exposed nuclear core, and you had just absorbed a lethal dose of radiation.
Yeah. That phenomenon is, well, it's essentially the air itself ionizing from the intense radioactive output. It's a visually stunning indicator of absolute catastrophe.
It really is. And welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are looking at an incredibly comprehensive historical account of the Chernobyl disaster.
And it's a heavy one.
It is. For many of you listening, that word Chernobyl is just synonymous with apocalypse. I mean, it is the ultimate horror story.
Oh, absolutely.
But our mission today is to kind of strip away the myth and look at the hard facts. We want to show you exactly how a routine safety test escalated into the most expensive disaster in human history. We're talking an estimated $700 billion.
Right. And the focus here isn't merely, what exploded. It's the mechanics of the failure.
Yeah.
Because this was a methodical, almost agonizing intersection of physics, human error, and a deeply ingrained culture of bureaucratic secrecy.
Which is fascinating.
When you break down the timeline, you really see how each decision locked the next one into place.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer irony of this entire disaster is that it began as a safety test.
Yeah, the irony is thick.
Right. They were trying to solve a very specific vulnerability at the plant. If the facility lost total external power, the backup diesel generators took about 60 to 75 seconds to reach full load.
Which is a long time in nuclear physics.
Exactly. They needed that power to run the massive water pumps that cool the reactor. And you absolutely cannot let a nuclear reactor go without cooling for a full minute.
No, you really can't.
So the test was designed to see if the rotational momentum of the spinning steam turbines, like as they were powering down, could generate just enough electricity to bridge that gap and keep the water flowing.
And that is a completely logical, necessary procedure.
Right.
But the fatal pivot happened before the test even started.
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy.
The electrical grid controller in Kiev called the plant and requested a delay in the power reduction. They needed the electricity for peak evening demand.
And that 11-hour delay fundamentally altered the timeline.
Totally.
Because the daytime engineering shift, who had prepared for this highly specific procedure, they eventually just clocked out.
Right.
Then the evening shift came and went. So the test ultimately fell into the laps of the night shift, who were, well, largely unprepared.
Yeah, they were just handed this massive responsibility.
The team was led by Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov. But the man physically operating the reactor controls was Leonid Toptunov, who was, get this, a 25-year-old senior engineer who had only been working independently for a few months.
Wow. And beyond the personnel change, that delay changed the physical state of the reactor itself.
How so?
Because it had been running at half power for hours, waiting for clearance, a fission byproduct called xenon-135 began to accumulate.
I really want to focus on the xenon poisoning because it's a massive part of why they lost control.
It's crucial, yeah.
Think of xenon-135 like carbon exhaust flooding an engine.
Yeah.
In normal operation, a reactor burns off that xenon as fast as it creates it.
Right, just processes it.
But because they were idling at low power for so long, the xenon just built up, and xenon absorbs neutrons, essentially acting like a sponge that sucks the life out of the nuclear chain reaction.
Sure.
Just joking the reactor. The power plummeted to an unintended near shutdown state of just 30 megawatts, but the test required 700 megawatts.
Right, so to keep your engine analogy going, the reactor was stalling out.
Yeah.
And to keep it running, the operators had to strip away the safety brakes. They began pulling the control rods out of the core to get the power back up.
And they pulled out almost all of them. Out of 211 control rods, they withdrew nearly every single one.
Which is terrifying.
It put the reactor into this incredibly unstable, fragile state. And this brings us to the fatal design flaw of the Soviet RBMK reactor. It has what physicists call a positive void coefficient.
Yeah, this is the mechanical heart of the disaster.
Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So in this specific reactor design, water absorbs neutrons. If the water boils and creates steam voids, well, there's less water to absorb those neutrons.
Okay.
That means the nuclear chain reaction increases, which creates more heat, which boils more water, creating more steam voids.
Wow.
It is an unyielding runaway feedback loop.
Which raises the question of why anyone would build a reactor that gets more volatile as it heats up.
Right. It seems entirely counterintuitive.
It basically comes down to Soviet economics and military utility. The RBMK design could use unenriched uranium, making it much cheaper to run. And critically, it allowed operators to extract weapons-grade plutonium while the reactor was still operating.
Exactly. The design prioritized dual-use efficiency over intrinsic safety. So you have a reactor inherently prone to power surges, choked by xenon, with its control rods completely withdrawn.
Right.
And it's being operated by a crew trying to push through a delayed test.
So the stage is set. At 1:23 a.m., the test begins. Water flow is reduced, steam voids form, and the power starts to spike.
Just as the physics dictate.
Wait, so to stop a runaway reaction, the operators pressed the emergency AZ5 button. The goal was to drop all the control rods back in and instantly shut the reactor down.
That was the intended function, yes.
But because the control rods had graphite tips, pushing the emergency brakes actually acted like slamming the accelerator.
Yes. The moment those graphite tips entered the core, they ousted the neutron-absorbing water. Graphite actually moderates and increases the nuclear reaction.
That's insane.
So the power spike was instantaneous and massive.
Right.
The nuclear fuel ruptured, the control rods physically jammed at 1/3 insertion, and the reactor's output jumped to roughly 30,000 megawatts thermal.
30,000.
Yeah, that is 10 times its normal operational maximum.
And then came the explosion. Well, two explosions, actually. The first blew the massive 1,000-ton biological shield completely off the top of the reactor like a flipped coin.
Just tossed it aside.
And the second, much more powerful blast scattered the core. We mentioned survivor Alexander Yevchenko earlier. He's the one who saw that very beautiful laser-like beam of blue light flooding up into infinity.
Yeah, it's chilling. And while the initial assumption was a hydrogen explosion, the mechanics of that second blast point toward a nuclear fizzle, basically a prompt criticality.
Or prompt criticality.
Right. Normally, a nuclear reaction is controlled by delayed neutrons, which gives mechanical control rods the time they need to move and adjust power.
Okay, that makes sense.
But a prompt criticality means the reaction is driven by instantaneous neutrons. The power doubles in milliseconds.
Wow. So nothing could react fast enough.
Exactly. Mechanical safety systems literally cannot move fast enough to stop it. The core material melted in the absence of water, creating an extraordinarily fast nuclear power transient.
So the reactor was gone, replaced by an exposed, burning core. But as we move into the immediate aftermath, you'd think a glowing column of ionized air shooting into the stratosphere would be the ultimate alarm bell.
You would think.
But the most terrifying element in those first few hours wasn't just the radiation. It was the absolute ironclad refusal to believe what was right in front of their eyes.
The psychological phenomenon of denial proved just as lethal as the physical destruction.
The first responders, the firefighters, arrived first, responding to what they thought was just an electrical fire on the roof.
With no warning of the radiation.
None. Grigory Kemmel, a driver of one of the fire engines, vividly recalled seeing blocks of glowing graphite scattered around the pavement. He actually kicked a chunk out of the way.
It's hard to hear that.
Firefighters reported that the air tasted like metal, and they felt a sensation of pins and needles on their faces.
Which is a classic, terrifying symptom.
Right. That is exactly what Louis Slotin, the Manhattan Project physicist, reported feeling right before he died from a fatal radiation overdose in 1946.
Because these responders were walking into fields of ionizing radiation estimated at up to 20,000 roentgens per hour in certain areas.
That number is hard to wrap my head around.
To put that in perspective, a lethal dose is around 500 roentgens over 5 hours. Unprotected workers were receiving fatal doses in less than a minute.
So knowing that, how could the reactor crew chief, Alexander Akimov, just stay inside the building?
Yeah.
I mean, they are literally looking at pieces of the reactor core scattered on the ground outside. How do you just assume the reactor is still intact?
It was a perfect storm of technological limitation and psychological self-preservation.
What do you mean?
Well, the standard dosimeters they had access to maxed out at tiny fractions of a roentgen. They were just reading off scale.
Oh.
Akimov and his team assumed the instruments were simply broken. They clung to the highest number the dial could show, which was a microscopic fraction of the reality.
So they literally couldn't measure the danger.
Right. And psychologically, his mind could not process the impossible. The RBMK reactor was culturally touted as indestructible. Facing a reality that shattered his entire worldview, he chose the only explanation his brain could accept.
Which is that the reactor was fine.
Exactly. He assumed it was intact, and it just needed cooling water. He and his crew stayed in the dark, flooded corridors, desperately trying to manually crank valves to pump water into a ruined void. Akimov died from acute radiation exposure 3 weeks later.
That is so tragic. And that denial wasn't isolated to the control room either. It went all the way up the chain of command. The political cover-up is just staggering.
It really was systemic.
While the residents of the nearby city of Pripyat were getting metallic tastes in their mouths and suffering uncontrollable coughing fits, the acting Minister of Internal Affairs sent a report to a top Ukrainian official. And it stated that people were just going about their weekend, gardening, fishing, celebrating weddings.
Because the Soviet system rested entirely on an illusion of infallibility.
Right.
To admit a disaster of this scale was to admit a fundamental failure of the state apparatus itself. The government refused to publicly acknowledge the disaster for 2 full days.
And they only admitted it because they were caught.
Exactly.
Over 1,000 kilometers away, at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, radiation alarms started going off.
In Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers away.
Yeah. A worker walked in, and routine monitors detected radioactive particles on his shoes. The Swedes traced the radioactive cloud directly back to the Soviet Union and essentially threatened to file an official alert with the International Atomic Energy Agency.
That was the global turning point. Forced into a corner, Soviet television news broadcast a brief, 20-second announcement admitting an accident had occurred. It was an unprecedented admission for the regime.
But once the secret was forced into the light, the Soviet Union had to pivot from denial to frantic, desperate containment, because the reactor was still actively burning and there was a terrifying threat of a secondary catastrophe.
Right. The initial explosion was bad, but the most urgent threat lay beneath the destroyed reactor.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because if you've heard anything about Chernobyl, you've probably heard the myth of the three divers.
It's one of the most famous stories.
Underneath the reactor, there were large bubbler pools. It was water designed to suppress steam in case of a pipe break. But now you had corium melting its way down through the concrete floors.
And corium is awful stuff.
Yeah, it's a 1,200 degrees Celsius lava-like mixture of melted nuclear fuel, control rods, and sand.
If that highly pressurized molten corium hit those flooded bubbler pools, the rapid expansion of water into steam would have triggered a massive thermal explosion.
Like a second disaster.
Absolutely. It would have likely destroyed the remaining intact reactors on the site and spread an unimaginable amount of radioactive material across half of Europe.
So 3 men, engineer Alexei Yanenko, Boris Baranov, and Valery Bespalov, volunteered to wade into the dark, highly radioactive water in the basement corridors. They had to manually find and open the sluice gates to drain the pools.
Right.
And the enduring popular myth is that these men sacrificed themselves and died agonizing deaths days later. But the historical record is very clear here. They didn't.
No, they didn't.
They survived. They lived long lives. And all 3 were awarded medals by the Ukrainian government in 2018.
It really challenges the fatalistic narrative often attached to the disaster. Not every heroic intervention resulted in immediate death.
That's a great point.
But the subsequent mitigation efforts were undeniably brutal. Once the pools were drained and the immediate fire suppressed, the focus shifted to the roof of Reactor 3, which was covered in 100 tons of highly radioactive graphite debris.
Right, because before they could build the concrete sarcophagus over the ruined reactor, they had to clear that roof. They initially tried using advanced machinery, like lunar rovers and remote-controlled police robots from West Germany.
Which sounds like a good idea.
But sending those machines into that kind of radiation field was exactly like putting a smartphone inside a microwave. The intense gamma radiation literally scrambled and fried their microchips. The machines just died in their tracks.
So with technology rendered completely useless, the authorities deployed what they grimly termed biorobots.
Biorobots, yeah.
These were 3,828 human liquidators, mostly conscripted military personnel.
They strapped heavy lead aprons onto these young men and sent them out onto the roof with shovels. The radiation was so intense that they were strictly limited to 40 to 90 seconds on the roof each.
Just incredible.
Run out, shovel one single load of radioactive graphite over the edge, and run back inside before absorbing a lifetime dose.
It is a vivid demonstration of the sheer scale of human capital required to mitigate the systemic failure. And while thousands were manually clearing the roof, investigators were still trying to locate where the actual nuclear core had vanished to.
That search led to a terrifying discovery in December 1986 by an investigator named Vasya Koryagin.
Down in the dark, destroyed basement corridors.
Yeah, they finally found it. The corium had flowed down pipes and solidified into a massive, wrinkled mass they dubbed the elephant's foot.
A very fitting name.
It was so radioactive that just spending a few minutes in its presence would deliver a lethal dose. The mass was originally so incredibly dense and hard that when they tried to get a sample, their drills couldn't penetrate it.
Right.
A police marksman eventually had to shoot it with an AK-47 armor-piercing round just to break a chunk off for scientific analysis.
The elephant's foot remains one of the most hazardous objects on Earth. It's a permanent, man-made radioactive lava. Ultimately, they entombed the entire reactor building in the initial concrete sarcophagus to try and contain the immediate danger.
So they managed to physically box in the building, but the invisible fallout had already escaped. Let's trace where that radiation went, because the ecological impact operates on principles you wouldn't necessarily expect.
What's fascinating here is how weather patterns completely dictated the contamination zones. The fallout didn't settle in a neat concentric circle around the plant.
Right.
It was driven by wind and a meteorological process called adiabatic cooling.
Yeah, adiabatic cooling. So when warm, moisture-laden air, which was carrying the radioactive isotopes, hit mountain ranges like the Alps or the Scottish Highlands, the air was forced upward.
Yeah.
And as it rises, it expands and cools rapidly. The moisture condenses into rain, and that radioactive rain essentially scrubbed the particles out of the clouds, dumping them straight onto the high ground, hundreds of miles away.
And that precipitation created localized hotspots across Europe. The environmental aftereffects are still surfacing in deeply unexpected ways today.
Like the boars.
Exactly. Take the Bavarian forest in Germany. During the 2010 hunting season, around 1,000 wild boars harvested there were found to have radiation levels far above the legal limit for human consumption.
And it all comes down to truffles.
Yes, truffles.
These wild boars eat a specific type of underground deer truffle called elaphomyces. These fungi are incredibly efficient at absorbing radiocesium out of the soil and bioaccumulating it over decades.
Right.
The boars eat the radioactive truffles, and they become highly radioactive themselves.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But we see biology interacting with the radiation in even more direct ways inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone itself.
Well, this is the part I love.
Scientists discovered radiotrophic fungi growing directly on the highly radioactive walls of the ruined reactor. Specifically, a black fungus called Cladosporium spherospermum.
We've talked about radiation destroying advanced robotics and human DNA, but deep inside the reactor, this biology doesn't just survive radiation, it actually eats it.
It feeds on it.
This fungus uses melanin. Melanin is a pigment that usually protects cells from UV radiation by absorbing it. But in these fungi, the melanin acts almost like chlorophyll in a plant.
Right.
It captures the gamma radiation, alters its own electron shell, and uses that high-energy state to drive metabolic growth. Scientists are now intensely studying this fungus to see if those exact properties could be synthesized to protect astronauts from cosmic radiation during long-term space travel.
It is a remarkable testament to life's ability to adapt to extreme alien environments.
It really is.
However, the human toll of the disaster offers no such silver lining.
No.
The immediate death toll was 28 plant workers and firefighters who died from acute radiation syndrome within weeks.
Beyond the immediate deaths, the long-term health effects are highly debated. But the most clearly established impact is a terrifying epidemic of childhood thyroid cancer.
Yes.
The mechanism here is tragic. The radioactive iodine released in the early days settled on pastures, was eaten by grazing cows and concentrated in their milk.
And then kids drank it.
Children who drank that local milk absorbed the radioactive iodine directly into their growing thyroid glands. By 2005, there were over 6,000 recorded cases of thyroid cancer in children and adolescents across Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine.
And while thyroid cancer is highly treatable, there were 15 reported deaths among those 6,000 cases. The physiological trauma to those communities was immense.
Obviously.
Yet the psychological fallout generated entirely different casualties across the globe.
This is where I want to push back on something, or at least get some clarity, because the scale of the psychological reaction is hard to believe.
Okay, what do you mean?
The sources mentioned there were an estimated 150,000 elective abortions worldwide directly linked to the fear of radiation.
Yes.
Are you saying the fear of radiation caused more immediate, drastic medical actions across Europe than the physical radiation itself? Weren't doctors in Western Europe telling patients to do this, or was it purely public panic?
It was a tragic feedback loop, really. In some cases, confused medical practitioners did give overly cautious advice because they lacked clear data. But largely, it was driven by a profound phenomenon known as radiophobia. People in countries far outside the heavy contamination zones, like Greece and Denmark, sought abortions because they fundamentally mistrusted the authorities. They assumed their governments were lying about the risks, just as the Soviet government had lied. They believed the radiation would cause severe birth defects, regardless of what official broadcasts claimed.
But major epidemiological studies across Europe, assessing hundreds of thousands of births, found absolutely no spike in congenital anomalies attributable to Chernobyl. The radiation doses to the general public outside the immediate area were physically too low.
The physical hazard was absent, but the psychological terror was real. It proves that a vacuum of truth, filled by misinformation and panic, can trigger a tangible, devastating public health crisis all on its own.
The macro costs of containing this disaster are just staggering. The Soviet Union spent an estimated 18 billion rubles at the time. Over 500,000 personnel, the liquidators were involved.
That's a million people.
And the containment isn't even finished. In 2016, they had to build a new safe confinement arch, sliding a metal structure taller than the Statue of Liberty over the original decaying sarcophagus, simply to buy the world another century of safety.
It's an ongoing battle.
So what does this all mean? When you zoom out from the melting corium, the graphite, and the truffles, what is the ultimate historical legacy we're left with?
Well, if we connect this to the geopolitical reality of the time, Chernobyl was really the catalyst for the fall of an empire.
Right.
Using Mikhail Gorbachev's own words, the final leader of the Soviet Union, he explicitly stated that the nuclear meltdown was perhaps the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet state.
Because it shattered the illusion of control.
Exactly. The disaster forced the policy of glasnost, or openness. The system simply could no longer hide the truth from its own citizens, nor from the international community.
Right.
The radiation literally crossed borders and set off alarms in sovereign nations. The bureaucratic silence that allowed fatal reactor design flaws to persist and that tried to cover up an explosion while citizens were actively being poisoned was exposed as fundamentally, irredeemably bankrupt.
The fall of the Soviet Union seamlessly brings us to a much broader realization. We began by talking about disasters feeling like meteor strikes, sudden, unpreventable acts of nature.
Yeah.
But Chernobyl was a machine built by human hands, operated within a culture that punished truth and rewarded blind obedience. When a society demands absolute compliance and ignores structural flaws, physics will eventually force its hand.
Physics doesn't care about bureaucracy.
Exactly. It makes you look differently at the infrastructure we rely on today.
Yeah.
I want you to ponder this.
Yeah.
Are our modern, complex black box systems, whether it's artificial intelligence algorithms making unseen decisions, or hyperfragile global supply chains, vulnerable to that exact same kind of bureaucratic silence?
That is a chilling thought.
If a critical warning light flashes today, are we actually fixing the underlying problem, or are we just assuming the dial is broken? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.